When you increase costs for farmers, Canadians pay more for groceries. When you increase costs for truckers, Canadians pay more for groceries. I'm Franco Terrazzano. I'm with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and I'm here on behalf of 235,000 Canadian taxpayers that want you to stop hiking the taxes that make it more expensive for farmers to make our food, for truckers to deliver our food, and for families to buy that food. There's an easy and quick way for the government to make food more affordable. Stop hiking taxes. But in less than 2 weeks, the government will raise the carbon tax for the 4th time since the beginning of the pandemic. The carbon tax will increase the price of gas by 14 cents per litre and the price of diesel by 17 cents per litre. Everything that gets delivered by truck will become more expensive, including your favorite kale salad. After the tax hike, federal carbon, fuel, and sales taxes will cost about 29 cents per litre of diesel. That means the big rig truck driver that delivers food to the store will pay about $260 in federal taxes every fuel up. Farmers say the carbon tax will cost them about $14,000 on average, and that was in 2019, according to the CFIB. And a higher carbon tax means it's more expensive for farmers to dry grain, and it means higher prices at the store. The carbon tax on propane and natural gas will cost farmers $1 billion through 2030. That's according to the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Let me read you a quote from Jeff Barlow, an Ontario corn, wheat, and soybean farmer. My competitors to the south of me in the United States do not pay that carbon tax, so now my cost goes up and I have no alternative. By penalizing me, there's nothing else that I can do but just be penalized. Less than a quarter of countries have a national carbon tax. That's according to the World Bank. Ottawa hiked taxes, while many of our peers and competitors cut taxes during the pandemic. 51 other national governments cut taxes. That includes more than half of G7 and G20 countries, and includes 2/3 of OECD countries. Australia, New Zealand, the Netherlands, Germany, South Korea, the United Kingdom, Italy, Israel, India, and Portugal are among those countries that cut fuel taxes. Ottawa is getting ready to impose a second carbon tax through fuel regulations this summer. British Columbia currently has a second carbon tax. It costs about 16 cents per litre of gas and 19 cents per litre of diesel. There are no rebates with the second carbon tax. The more you tax, the less money Canadians have to afford higher groceries. And if you think that you can raise taxes, skim some off the top, and still make people better off through rebates, then I have some Ocean View property in Regina to sell you. The carbon tax will cost the average family between $402 and $847 this year, even after the rebates. That's according to the PBO. That could be a couple weeks of groceries for a family for, but it's being taxed away. Lower and middle-income Canadians, households currently experiencing energy poverty, such as single mothers and seniors living on fixed income, will feel the most pain from the second carbon tax, and that's according to the government's own analysis. The higher carbon taxes are layered on top of higher payroll and higher alcohol taxes. 74% of Canadians say families pay too much tax, according to a recent Leger poll. Now, fortunately, you can provide relief for your constituents. You can help make life and groceries more affordable. At the very least, you must stop hiking taxes. Thank you.
You were talking about the impact on trucking and farmers and those types of things. When that carbon tax is tripled and $150,000 of carbon tax for an average 5,000-acre farm, I know you can't definitively say what the impact would be, but to your members, how are they going to manage those additional costs? And are they going to have to obviously pass that on to customers?
That's a great question, and you know it's tough to say just how much pain that's really going to cost, right? But look, everyone knows that farmers aren't just pools of cash that can continue to pay higher taxes after higher taxes after higher taxes. So really, only two things can happen. At least some of the costs make their way to the till and hurt families who are struggling to afford the jug of milk or the ground beef, or supply goes down. And what happens when we reduce Canadian supply? Prices, of course, go up. But even if we leave the farmers aside for a quick second, we're also seeing the increased costs of delivering those goods to the store. Carbon tax going up, second carbon tax coming in. So all of this is being layered on top of each other. It's hurting Canadian businesses, but it's also hurting Canadian families.
Has the CTF done anything in terms of, and maybe Ian can answer this question as well, on what the increase in the carbon tax and transportation, fertilizer, inputs, what the impact that is having on groceries specifically. Like if we see the carbon tax go to that $150,000 or is tripled, do we have an idea what the impact will be on grocery prices?
Well, I think the best analysis that has been done is by the government's own independent budget watchdog, the PBO. And it looks at all of the costs from the carbon tax compared to the rebates. And this year alone, the carbon tax will cost the average family between $402 to $847, even after the rebates. That's an annual cost, and it'll continue to go up and up and up through 2030.
Yeah, like I have an interesting bill here from one of my, well, actually not my constituent, but somebody else in Alberta, and they're sending me their gas co-op bill, and their natural gas was about $2.39 per gigajoule, and the federal carbon surcharge was $2.63 per gigajoule. So actually, they're paying more in the carbon tax than they are for the actual fuel. Is this a common story that you're hearing for some of your members?
Oh, we hear from so many people, especially during the cold winter months, that is very, very difficult to swallow that type of bill, right? Because we're talking about the necessities in life. We're talking about people having to pay more to fuel up their car to go to work. We're talking about people who have to pay more to keep their homes warm during the cold winter months. So what's so damaging about the carbon tax is that we are punishing people for the necessities in life.
So I was looking, Mr. Terrazzano, at the increase in the price in gasoline between 2021 and 2022. In fact, May 21 to May 22. It went up about 61.2 cents on average across Canada. During that same period, the price on pollution increased by 2.2 cents per litre. That left about 59 cents of increase in the average cost of gasoline across Canada, which seems to me that it's less than, 3% of the increase of the total price increase. So why is it that you are saying the entire problem lies with the price on pollution, the carbon price on pollution?
Oh, it's not the entire problem. You also saw the Bank of Canada print hundreds of billions of dollars right out of thin air. So it's not the only problem. I mean, look, the whole point of the carbon tax.
Excuse me. I'm asking a specific question about the price of pollution.
Ms. Taylor-Roy, Mr. Terrazzano, it is the member's time. I will certainly allow her to ask a question. There is some natural jostling back and forth, but if the member would like to go in a different line of questioning after you've had an adequate chance to respond, I have to let her do that. So we will try to make sure that we instigate that accordingly. Ms. Taylor-Roy, I'm going to turn it back to you.
In fact, when you look at the charts, what made up the increase was crude oil prices and wholesale margins on refining. It wasn't the Bank of Canada printing money. It wasn't the price on pollution. How do you explain that?
The whole point of the carbon tax, with respect, member, is to increase the price of gasoline. And quite frankly, I do think that the government must be patting itself on the back every time it drives by a Shell station and sees high gas prices.
Excuse me, Mr. Terrazzano, but you're not answering the question once again. I asked you about the 59-cent increase in the average price of gasoline over that period. While 2.2 cents was due to the price on pollution, 59 cents was due to the increase in crude oil prices and wholesale margins. So why aren't you focusing on that issue when you're talking about the increase in prices?
Well, with respect to the member, I think that members of parliament should control what they can control. And the number one thing that you can control is how much tax you take away from struggling families, many of whom are worried about both the price of ground beef with a jug of milk, but are also worried about how they're going to fuel up their car on the way to work. And
thank you. I understand your position. Thank you very much. So that minimal amount of the increase there, but that's interesting to note.
Mr. Terrazzano, if I've understood correctly about the carbon tax, well, I would like to hear you on the following. For states, the idea is to find a balance between not creating inflation with this tax where there is no other alternative, and pollution. We have a C-234 bill that is going to the House soon, and it will give even more exemptions for the agriculture industry. What do you think of this bill? Do you think that it will fix part of the problem that you've identified?
Very supportive. Yes, thank you, member. Very supportive. I mentioned a parliamentary budget officer report that noted that the carbon tax on propane and natural gas will cost about farmers $1 billion through 2030. I think that is a very good step in the right direction to help provide some relief at a very important time.
You understand the challenge of trying to be balanced and implementing policies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. If there is no action taken to protect the climate, well, then in few decades, global warming will be amplified, and then we will have more changes. Do you think it's possible for the government to take certain measures in order to ensure that there is not as much impact on the on climate change, for example, but still have make some changes with regards to policy?
Well, thank you for the question. So I understand that everyone in this room really cares about the environment, and including our panel members who are not in this room. We heard the Saskatchewan panel member who represents the ag industry there talk about how farmers really care about the environment and how they want to continue to innovate and invest in technology to help the environment. But I just don't think hammering farmers with thousands of dollars of higher taxes is really a good way to help the environment. I also heard if we take more money away from farmers who are just trying to survive and put food on our table, then they have less money to reinvest in their operations and new capital.
I know your position on carbon pricing. I think that's no secret to anyone who's read your briefs on this. But, he was presenting data that showed, oil and gas extraction since 2019 has seen their net profits go up by over 1,000%. Petroleum refining has seen their profits since 2019 go up by 40%. Now, I understand your position on carbon pricing, but do you not think it's a bit of a disservice to Canadians if you're only focusing on carbon pricing but not talking about how those other net profit, those massive increases are also affecting our farmers and affecting what families are paying at the pump? Do you not owe it to Canadians to maybe broaden your narrative to talk a little bit more wholeheartedly about some of those other factors, how they're causing families a lot of pain at the pump and at the grocery store?
Well, I guess my question to properly answer yours is, well, what would you be recommending? Because when I hear that type of questioning, the first thing that comes to mind is a new tax. But I have never heard of a new tax that will make groceries more affordable. In fact, tax increases make everything more expensive. So I'm very concerned whenever I hear that type of questioning. Of course, I've spoken to the person that you mentioned before. So we reject a tax hike. We categorically reject tax hikes. We don't see the problem today as Canadians not paying enough tax.
Let me hold you there. So on that point, okay, so you're not in favor of us going after large profitable corporations. Fine. Does the Canadian Taxpayers Federation have any position on the fact that in 2021, corporations paid $31 billion less in tax than they should have? And do you not have any opinion on how that gap in revenue is passed down to working families, forcing them to shoulder more of the burden?
Well, to that I would answer, the number one thing you have to stop doing is stop handing big corporations big buckets of cash, right? Stop the corporate welfare, because what we have seen, unfortunately, especially throughout the pandemic, taxes raised on families who can't afford it, who may have lost their job, took pay cuts, maybe even lost their small business. Now you have families who are struggling to afford the price of groceries, and we continue to see taxes go up and more announcements of the government handing buckets of cash to big corporations. We are categorically against that corporate welfare.
Yeah, no, corporate welfare, I'm glad that we can agree on that point. I think that's a good point to end this line of questioning on, so I appreciate that.
With regards to the tax, or the carbon tax, and C-234, Mr. Terrazzano, you support this bill. We've been told, especially for Quebec, that it wasn't applicable. On the contrary, I do think that there is a direct impact because we already have a taxation system in Quebec, but when we add products like propane or natural gas, there is an overtax that is added. Do you think that Quebec will lose because they will be doubly taxed?
Support the piece of legislation that would remove the carbon tax on farm propane and natural gas. Specifically about your question to Quebec, I'm not sure I have a great answer for you today, but I'm happy for us to follow up and to discuss that. I do know that the fuel taxes in Quebec are particularly harmful, though.